So what is good to you?
Good is people supporting people stepping outside of the sphere of what they have to do or what they need to do and actually doing what they want to do. That is good.
Welcome to Chasing Good, a circle group podcast with the aim to help us better understand the good that's happening in the world today. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome back, I should say, to Chasing Good. Here with me today, I've got Golden Whitrod from Genetic Cures for Kids. Golden, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So let's kick this off, and I suppose to start off the conversation, I'd love to get a bit of an idea, as we tend to like to do. Tell me a little bit about the background of Genetic Cures for Kids, of yourself, and what's brought you here today.
For sure. Look, Genetic Cures for Kids is our family-led foundation. And if 4 years ago you told me that I was going to be running a genetic research foundation, I would have laughed that off because I wouldn't have known what genetic research was. And we run this foundation because our daughter lives with a rare genetic disease. And when we found out that she had a rare genetic disease, we also found out in the exact same moment with the doctors that nobody knows much about these diseases, and research isn't done on these diseases because it doesn't attract pharmaceutical support. So what happened for us was we realized that there was this massive gap in the support that was needed for people living with these diseases. And when our daughter became one of them, we became a vulnerable family with no support. And we decided that we needed to fill that gap for us because we were drowning otherwise. And we needed to fill that then for other families as well who were living with the same condition that our daughter has, but also with other people living with similar conditions. So that's sort of where Genetic Cures for Kids came from. It was really born out of desperation to help our daughter. And it became a really inspiring journey, actually. It's been an incredible 3 years, and we have, under no uncertain terms, we have stumbled our way through this, but we found people who are a lot smarter than us and a lot more organised to help us to create a really solid foundation that is completely volunteer-led by a brilliant board, overseen by a scientific advisory board now, and with researchers who are just, mind-blowingly smart, but also really kind, like good people who give their time pretty much pro bono, and we pay for whatever they need to have covered in terms of the basic things to make something happen. But these people work overtime around the clock, and we've just been really fortunate and also, I think, savvy, I suppose, in working through and finding the best of the best because our daughter's life depended on it. And through that, people have also come forward, and we've just found a brilliant group, and here we are. Genetic Cures for Kids is now going strong, and its first campaign, it's called Our Moon's Mission, which is a tip of the hat to our beautiful girl, Tallulah Moon. And our mission for Tallulah Moon is to find, first and foremost, a cure for her rare genetic disease.
Obviously, we've spoken quite a lot in the past, but I still find it hard to comprehend just how difficult it would be to go through the process of acceptance and action in such a effective way that you have. Obviously, 3 years is you can do a lot in 3 years, as you've so shown, but 3 years is not so much time. And in that time, you've not just discovered that you've got a genetic disease. You've then flipped that. You and Chris have built a charity and created a system and a process to find a cure for obviously SPG 56, but then also making it easier for other rare genetic diseases too. It's bloody incredible how you guys have just done it, and it is such a short time in an industry that isn't typically known for agility.
Mm-hmm. This is true. Yep.
How have you gone about, moving this incredibly big initiative forward at such a pace?
It's a good question. And when you say you moved from acceptance into sort of motivation and action in a short space, you reminded me really that it happened in almost a serendipitous way, that Tallulah was actually misdiagnosed when we first hit the hospitals with this little girl who had been hitting all of her milestones and then suddenly had this steep regression where she lost all of her skills and she couldn't even hold her neck up. She couldn't walk anymore. She couldn't crawl. She couldn't roll over. She couldn't even sit up. She couldn't talk. So we took this floppy baby into the hospital, and they told us from looking at our daughter that she had a very rare genetic disease called leukodystrophy. Admittedly, a lot more common than SPG 56, we later found out. But we got given this diagnosis just from an observation and a couple of MRIs. The doctors were certain of this, and they gave us months to live with our girl. And that for us was absolutely destroying. We could not pick ourselves up off the floor. There was no acceptance of that. And I remember point blank yelling at the doctors and saying, you can't tell me that without a diagnosis. You cannot give me months with my daughter. But the reason I want to bring that up, Mike, is that because these beautiful doctors, they really were trying to help, and they wanted to prove it to us then, because I said, you can't do this to me. They then put her on this study down in Melbourne where she had her whole genome sequenced, and that's where they then, through mapping every gene in her body, discovered that she had an even rarer genetic disease. But the reason I want to walk you through that journey is when 4 months later they got that diagnosis, we had just lived those months left with our daughter. We had been preparing for the end that we were not ready for. And I still feel choked up when I think about that. It's like it takes me back to that moment. But the doctors at that point, when we were thinking, this is where they're going to confirm this. And in my heart, I knew they were wrong. And they said, we're wrong. And I thought, yes. And they said, she's got an even rarer genetic neurodegenerative disease. And I just thought, well, what does this mean? And they said, we don't know. But we know it's slowly progressive. And all of a sudden, we had this new lease on life. And that's where I think you triggered that memory for me, was that moved from acceptance to motivation, because suddenly we'd been given this second chance. We had literally been packing up our lives and preparing ourselves to tell Tallulah's big brother that he would be an only child. And suddenly these doctors had given us this gift that was not this fast progressing disease, but a slow one. And we had time. So that really motivated us. And that motivated us to find other families around the world through social media. And we also then found the scientists. We started knocking on doors, emailing, rocking up to science labs and asking the question, what can you do for rare genetic diseases? And it was then that it became apparent really quickly that there is, at large scale, clinical trials happening all over the world for genetic diseases, but the lion's share of those are being funded through family-led foundations. Because right now, and I mean right now because not yet, right now there isn't the government investment in rare diseases. It doesn't seem to get a place at the table alongside diseases that have similar statistics, such as asthma and diabetes. I mean, 8% of the Australian population are living with a rare genetic disease today. So that's about 2 million people. Those are similar numbers to the number of people who are living with asthma and diabetes. But you've heard of asthma and diabetes your whole life. And there are foundations back to back that support these causes, and there are treatments, and I've worked in health systems where there are incredible departments dedicated to these diseases. So until such time that government really can step forward and start to initiate the change in the perspective of how important rare disease treatments are and how accessible they can be, it has been up to families to fund the research. So in a roundabout way, I guess I'm trying to say that we found out that through our sort of interviews with these various researchers around the world is that these treatments are getting developed, but if we wanted one for our little girl, who was the only diagnosis in Australia at that point and still is today, then we would have to fund it. And that's then where Genetic Cures for Kids started to be born. That's where we seeded this idea that, okay, we can fund it with everything we've got, but we're going to run out of funds pretty quickly. We're one family, so we need something that's bigger than us, and that's when the foundation started to take form, and we started to look for our board and the right set of people who wanted to support us on this journey. And I can tell you, people stepped forward straight away. It's been one of those scenarios where you would not wish a rare disease upon anybody, and certainly not upon anyone's newborn child. But what has happened for Chris and I is we've experienced through the last 3.5, 4 years, we've experienced a part of humanity that I just don't think most people get exposure to. And it's that moment when you are in despair and lost that people turn around and want to help you. And they can be the professionals, the doctors, the researchers, the scientists, the journalists, the podcasters, but they can also be the people on the street, you know. It's a teacher or somebody with an idea or a connection. It's been non-stop for us, a real revelation of the goodness of humanity. You know, it's been a blessing.
So tell me about,
I suppose, the broader picture of the process in finding a cure for a rare genetic disease, because this is a something that not many people would understand, I suppose, and all was completely new to me until you explained it. What does it mean to find a cure for a rare genetic disease?
Certainly not an answer that was very clear at the beginning for any of us. So what we found out was that there was a variety of different approaches to treating genetic diseases, and some of them were to find repurposed drugs, so drugs that are already on the market that are FDA or TGA approved, that have been trialled in the labs and proven to be safe and effective to then treat another disease. So they call that drug repurposing. That was one of the avenues that seemed like a really great way to go, because potentially using AI and incredible machinery, they would be able to test thousands of these compounds and drugs and see if they could be effective. The other one was gene therapy. And again, there's a myriad of gene therapies. But what became apparent for us and Tallulah's rare genetic disease, because she has a recessive genetic disease, meaning she has two copies of a gene, both of which have glitches on them that cause the SPG56 disease. She, or people with a disease like Tallulah's, these recessive genetic conditions, they are good candidates for something called gene addition therapy, where you literally would add the working copy of the gene that the person needs into the cells via a virus, a clean virus that's the carrier. And then that then does the work for the two genes that aren't functioning well. So these were our two options. And when we started down the road for our men's mission, our campaign to find a cure for SPG 56, that's what we did. We tried drug repurposing and we tried gene therapy. And so we had two bodies of work going with two different universities at Griffith Institute of Drug Discovery for drug repurposing and at University of Queensland, where they were testing gene therapies on brain organoids. And I mean, this is mind-blowing stuff. Like, these guys take a drop of Tallulah's blood, or they take a drop of your blood, Mike, and from that they can spin your blood into an induced pluripotent stem cell, which is a really long word for the teeny tiny cells that you are when you're a 5-day-old embryo. And from that they can create an organ, a very small organ of whatever they need for this particular disease. And of course, Tallulah has a brain disease, so they can make mini brains. If she has a liver disease, they could make mini livers, or any other part of the body today. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So what we did with the University of Queensland is they started developing these mini brains and testing a variety of gene therapies on these brains to see what worked, what didn't, and so forth. So fast track, 3 years later, what we found was that we came up stumps a bit with the drug repurposing, but the gene therapy has been progressing really well in terms of its safety and efficacy. So we're seeing in the labs that not only is the gene therapy seeming to halt the disease, even at really high doses, much higher than you'll give a human, there's no toxicity, so it's safe. And what we're also seeing is that these little mini brains, the axons inside them, are being rescued and recovered. So that for me as a mum, to think of a gene therapy that could stop the disease getting worse for my daughter and perhaps give her back, regenerate something that she's lost, like, that is just, that's everything. Yeah, that's everything. I mean, it's a dream potentially come true, but this is science. And, you know, we're always reminded as parents, we're way too optimistic for the scientists. They always, you know, try to quell our enthusiasm a little because, you know, what happens in a lab and then what happens on a human, it can be different. And that's why clinical trials take place. But the wonderful thing is that over these last years, we have, you know, it's always been 2 steps forward, 1 step back with the research, and we certainly feel like it's gone slower than we'd like, whereas a lot of scientists have been absolutely amazed at how efficient these teams have worked, and also how they've collaborated with other parent research organisations before us who have spearheaded gene therapies for similar rare diseases. You know, they've gone out and collaborated with these other teams and built on the information and garnered that support so that they could be more efficient, so that they could save on costs, but also time, and get to this point where we're at now, where we could take what they've learned in the labs, what they studied on these mini brains, and take it to the first human clinical trial as early as next year. So that for us means our little girl and a small cohort of children from around the world, 4 other kids, coming to Australia, getting to go to the hospital and getting to get a medicine for a disease that 4 years ago doctors said had no hope for a cure. And those families and us are looking forward to that with a bated breath, I can tell you.
The word hope is such an interesting one, and because surely it's been one of the only things that you could lean on throughout some of the processes here, and not necessarily easily reached either at times. What does hope mean to you through this process?
What does hope mean? I think like you say, we've hung on to hope. It's that feeling that you'll get there against all the odds. And like somebody said to me recently and reminded me, there's no such thing as false hope. All hope is real. And I think hope is this tangible light, if you could have tangible light. But it's this thing that you can literally grab onto, even though it's a figment. It's something that you reach for. It's something that we certainly strive for and reach for, even when we get, a blow with the science, when things could start to feel hopeless. You're reminded, even by the scientists in those moments, that there is still hope. This is not a go, no-go situation. There never is. There's always a way to work around. And I guess hope for us has always been this stronghold, because we have to find a way to think laterally in so many different situations. And certainly when, we got the diagnosis of a disease that had no treatment, no cure, and people would have felt like that was probably the most hopeless situation you could find yourself in. You look at your little daughter and you think, this is hopeless. But it wasn't, There was our little girl smiling at us and telling us in her eyes that she wanted to live. And she is hope personified. She is tangible hope. I think when I look at Tallulah, I see her, as this incredible little person who loves artwork and loves dancing and loves singing. But I think from the perspective of Our Moon's mission and her journey as a child born with a rare genetic disease, I think she is a catalyst for hope. And she's given not only us the motivation to do what we've done and find these scientists who do what they're doing and want to do it for Tallulah and children like her, but she's been motivation for families all over the world to look towards the future with their kids, that it's going to be a good one and it can be a good one. I think that when you go to the hospital with your baby, with your floppy baby, you get a lot of bad news, unfortunately. And you have to be stoic if you're going to push through that. Like, if you're going to say, this isn't bad news and I'm going to find the good news, that's the person that's holding on to hope above all else, I think. And I credit a lot of this to Tallulah, but I do remember that when we were in that sort of 4-month period of the misdiagnosis land and we were waiting for that whole genome sequencing, we were, from a day-to-day sort of perspective, there were big bouts of hopelessness, because we really feared that they could be right. Those doctors could be right when they came back with that diagnosis. And the person that really had all the hope and all the joy was our son. And he was a 4-year-old boy, Finn Atlas, at the time. And he didn't know anything other than joy. And so he would really pull us out of our hopelessness and our despair, and make us realize that the only way forward for us with our family, if we're going to function, is to have hope and to stay positive and to keep looking for the goodness and to keep looking for the wins, the millistones, we started to call them, as Tallulah grappled with this massive loss of function and mobility, no speech, no walking, no talking, no crawling, no sitting. This little girl still wanted to learn. She still wanted to have fun, and so did her brother. And they taught us that every single day had to be about joy. We didn't know how many more days we had at that point. And so that then became our new MO, was joy. Joy has to be an integrated factor into our day, every day with our kids. That was a gift from Finn for us. And that also set us, I think, on a really good path, because when we got that diagnosis and we got more time and we decided we were going to do this foundation, we also then just had this foundation where everything was optimism and there was joy in all that we did. So I see that sort of feed into and weave through all of the things that are our Wings mission these days, the events that we hold and the work that we do. It's all for a serious cause, but often really positive and really joyful and really fun. We really focus all the time on the hope for the future. And we've always focused really on the chance that it will work out and the knowledge that it can work out. Possibilities are endless. And today, where we are with gene therapies and genetic research, we are literally just scratching the surface. And there are hundreds and hundreds of clinical trials out there right now. So I feel like we're here to really, I suppose we're lucky. I'm here living this life with my daughter at a time when we can find the treatments and the science is there, and it'll be better in 5 years' time again for the next generation of little kids coming onto the market. But we will be feeding into that. Our legacy and the work that we're doing at Genetic Cures for Kids, I'm very proud to say that we will be helping to make that better for that next generation of children, not just with SPG56, but kids with rare diseases all over the world.
There's a few things to unpack in that, I suppose, and the reference piece. So we'll start with the reference piece of joy, because joy is such an important aspect to living. And when you talk about having that framework for building a life upon, building or integrating the habit of prioritizing joy into your day-to-day life, you might say out of desperation, I suppose, at some point, but then to now see that across all elements of life, that would make quite a profound impact on not just your family, but each of you individually, as well as Genetic Cures for Kids, and then the kind of the people that you come into your
Just our scant sphere.
How does that? How have you personally seen that change you?
Well,
Or has that been something that has come natural in the past and it's been easier to?
no, I wouldn't say. I think I've lived a fairly joyful life for the most part, but I do think that like I say, I think this exposure to bulk good in humanity over the last few years has really given us a lot more time to reflect and then find joy from that, to really reflect on the gift that we've been given here and the chance to make positive change in this particular space in rare diseases. I think the joy has become something that, you still seek out. I think as humans, we have the tendency to often, grab onto negative thought or fear comes into play and it can take over like this spectre, can't it? And that's all very real, that hasn't disappeared, and I don't sort of walk around in a monk-like state that everything is going to be well and all things change and everything will be fine. I think I can fall back into these patterns where, of course, you still have fears and apprehensions and wonder what will come. But the joy part, weaving that through our daily lives and ensuring that we have that in the presence of our children, that does go on to filter, into our own heads and our own spaces when we're on our own and as individuals as well. For me, I've realized that I need to find joy for myself to be able to sort of muscle up and keep on. Sometimes I feel like I'm clawing forward with the gene therapy research and this massive mission. It really isn't an easy feat. And so I seek joy in different little ways. And right before we met this morning, I went out for my weekly tradition, which is a swim out in off Noosa Main Beach and out in the ocean with about 30 retirees. And we don these pink caps and we pop on our bathers and trot off down the beach, and off we swim for about a K or a K and a half every Tuesday morning. And when I emerge from that water every Tuesday without fail, that is like peak joy for me. That is my happiest state, right? Right when I'm coming out of the beach, I'm thinking about going to get that coffee, I'm getting ready for my day, the endorphins are running high. And also, I just feel so positive about what the week ahead can bring. And that's when I often get my best ideas, or I think about calling that person or reaching out to that philanthropist again, or checking in with that biotech. I think finding those places that give you joy are still super important, and I can't find them just with my children, or I can't find them just with my partner. I do find them out in the water for me, or in nature. I'm a massive advocate for a good hike, and I love a physical challenge so that I can just actually switch off that frontal lobe a bit and not think about the past and the future, and just think about where my foot is going and where the next step is and what the next view is going to be like. That for me, that's like it's like a refuel station out there. I think people call it nature bathing these days. I've heard that.
I like that. Oh, that's bathing. Everything you've described there does reference something that's similar, and reference the Stoicism, effectively, which is something that gets brought up quite often on the podcast, funnily enough. Has that been something that you've practiced, or I suppose explored further?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that I've ever even seen myself as necessarily stoic, to be honest. But it's certainly, taken some stoicism to carry on. And, we've had to be tenacious and we've had to be persistent. But as well, I think having a partnership with someone who, feels as strongly as I do about the need for this to happen, for us to achieve this, that's given us space to then, find time to be weak, when you just can't be stoic anymore and you can just let the reins down, and then you know there's somebody else there supporting you who can be stoic for you while you fall apart for a while on the floor, and then gives you a bit of time to get back up and get going again. And, I have to hand it to my husband, Chris, who supports me and I support him through all of this. It's a very, very vulnerable space to be in, to throw your entire business at it, to give up your career for it, to give up your home for it, to pretty much put all the bets on the table and still be sure that you're heading in the right direction. I think it takes support and love, and that's what that's what I'm really grateful for. I've got that in Chris, and I feel incredibly grateful that he has dedicated and sacrificed so much of his time and life to running his business so that we can fund this research. I mean, fundraising in Australia is not easy. It's a slow burn. And, until we find that philanthropist who can help us, really, my husband has funded a lot of this through his business and kept it going and worked overtime. I'm really grateful for that. And I know that that's been a huge motivator for him. And I know it's not been easy. And we have to manage, burnout and be careful of those sorts of things as well. But again, that's where we need to remember that there's those bucket fillers, right? That nature bathing, the getting out for a swim, and that finding and seeking joy, something that just, you can go out and have that reprieve and come back to then put on your stoic hat, I suppose. Yeah.
Looking at the kind of broader picture of finding the cure, can you tell me a little bit about, I suppose, what happens to other cures, or the process once you have established the frameworks of finding the cure for SPG5/6? What that means for other rare genetic diseases too.
For sure. So the University of Queensland, who I mentioned earlier, who developed the brain organoids and test gene therapies, what they received funding in 2022 for was for the genetic research that we were doing. And they received a grant because what they were creating through this remarkable science of testing gene therapies on brain organoids is they were creating a replicable framework for going on to develop treatments for other rare diseases. So what we're doing alongside a manufacturer in the USA at Weill Cornell Medicine, so the biggest Ivy League university in the States, and the medical college who are developing this gene therapy, manufacturing it, they are working with the University of Queensland to create this gene therapy. And like I say, it's gene addition. So essentially, we are just adding the gene that Tallulah needs to a vector, which is a clean viral vector, and it will carry the gene through a single dose injection into the cerebral spinal fluid. It carries the gene into the central nervous system and populates the cells and adds that gene that the cells need to do the job. So what that does for Tallulah's disease is it treats SPG56 because they add exactly the gene that she needs. Now, what they can do with the replicable framework is if someone comes along with SPG57, is they can take the gene that that patient needs and add it to the viral vector. So this is an individualized medicine that we're creating, but it's replicable because you can just take, and I say just, it's an incredible science that takes a lot more work, and oversimplifying this here, but you are literally just adding the gene that the person needs, and the viral vector is then carrying it into the cell to populate those cells and stop the disease from doing further harm, and hopefully recovering some of those disease issues that have taken place already. So what we're seeing with other diseases that are being treated with this AAV9 gene therapy, this gene addition, is that it is halting the disease from getting any worse for children with progressive diseases. But the beautiful thing is, Mike, is that the kids who are getting treated at birth, so families who have decided to extend their family and they know that they carry the gene, they can find out in utero if their child is going to have SPG 56 or SPG 50. And at birth, if that child is dosed before the disease starts to take place, what they're seeing with other diseases is that this is curative. So the disease never actually starts taking place. The kid really was born with the two genetic glitches, but the disease doesn't start. They never end up having it. And we're seeing that with SMA type 1, which is one of the most common and FDA-approved gene therapies on the market. And it's it's been through clinical trials in Australia, and now children are getting dosed at hospitals here with that at birth. And they are walking and talking and running around, and otherwise 4 years ago would have been perishing at 14 months. So we've learned from them. Those have been frameworks that we have replicated, and what we're creating and the science that we are creating goes on to then feed those next set of rare diseases as well. So, we're not spearheading something for the very first time. We have learned from other parent organisations and other big biotechs like the Zolgensma gene therapy. But we aren't the last. And every clinical trial that gets started and proves its efficacy and helps these children live the life they deserve is just opening the floodgate, I believe, to gene therapies and individualised medicines that will be available to treat kids. I think in a decade from now, we are going to see individualised medicines being on the market and on the PBS and available for families like ours who would have otherwise just been lost and alone. It's such an exciting time. I'm absolutely blessed to be involved in this sort of world right now as it's developing and where it's at today.
The impact is impossible to quantify, but so meaningful, so incredibly meaningful. You've obviously had such an exposure, or broad exposure to so many different core industries, core individuals around these industries, which would be in itself unique. I suppose through that, and you talk about some of the good people along the way. I am really interested to understand what that good has meant to you, and I suppose if it's also changed through this process. So, what is good to you?
Good is people supporting people, and that's what we've seen time and again, day after day. That has been our experience ever since we hit hardship, ever since our whole world fell apart. We have seen good happening around us. And even, even when that misdiagnosis happened, those doctors were doing good. They were trying to help understand what was going on, this incredibly complex situation. They were good people. And they persevered because we really needed them to. But they worked so hard to find an answer for us. And for me, you know, people stepping outside of the sphere of what they have to do or what they need to do and actually doing what they want to do, that is good. That is good.
It's interesting as well because what I am hearing and what I'm feeling is not just a sense of seeing good, but also feeling good from those around you. I suppose you've felt good quite extensively in the past as well, from being on the, receding end of good action from these doctors, from these people. What does that? Do you have has your perspective of the feeling of good changed?
I think, when you say we've been on the receiving side of feeling good, you're spot on because we run, for example, these big events to fundraise. So there's a very clear goal there. You are trying to raise funds. And people often ask me, what did you get from that event? What did you get from that gala? What did you get from that music gig? And there's a dollar figure attached to that. But what we really get from it is this incredible feeling of motivation and love and support. And you cannot put a dollar figure on that. And a lot of people might think that I'm just talking it up now, but there is seriously, it is bigger than the dollar figure. When you stand up in front of a crowd and you share your story and you feel this surge of love and support from a whole crowd of people who would otherwise not have known you, telling you you can do it and telling you you can forge ahead and telling you can get to the mission at the end, that is a feeling of good that I've never, ever, ever been exposed to before. And that motivation, as I've told people so many times, that gives us the energy to push ahead for the next year, to push ahead for the next months, because we feel this feeling of being wrapped up and supported by this community. You feel like someone's really literally got your back. And that's a feeling of good that definitely has changed and that I've learned about since running this foundation. And Mike, it comes from a word that you mentioned a little earlier before we started the program, which was being vulnerable. And I think it's that feeling of like really letting yourself be vulnerable. And really, when I got to tell this story, and every time I do tell it, I feel incredibly vulnerable and I can't help but feel pulled back into those moments. But the good that is given back to me as a gift from that, from sharing that vulnerability, that is like a superpower. It has given my husband and I so much energy so many times whenever we've reached out to community and shared those stories and been given that good back from them. That's definitely where you feel the good, I think.
I think it's also a question of reciprocity, not question, statement of reciprocity as well, because what you put out is also what you get back, right? And vulnerability is one thing, but vulnerability accompanied by good action that's helping your child, but helping the greater, broader community in such a way that it is as well. I think your story is really one that builds faith in humanity. What you and Chris and your entire family, obviously, are building to do. I truly take my hat off to you all. I think that it's an absolute privilege to get to witness what you guys are doing from the side. We are Thank you for all that you do, for all that you guys are doing. This is all we have time for, unfortunately, now. But what I will be doing is putting the details, all of the details for Golden Chris's charity, Genetic Cures for Kids, and Outwind's mission will be available, as well as Chris's business, Workmate 2, for anyone who wishes to support what they're doing. Because what they're doing is for everyone and is incredible. And thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for joining Tallulah's army by sharing our story.
Thanks so much for listening to Chasing Good, a Circle Group podcast. Our mission is to shift the world closer to kindness, sustainability, awareness, and action. We hope you enjoyed. Until next time.